Hey everyone, happy holidays. Thanks for your time. NASA held an Artemis media event at the Kennedy Space Center on Monday, December 16th. This follows right on the heels of the first Artemis-related press conference since the beginning of the year. With the welcome but increasingly rare access to Orion and SLS worksites, the media was given an update on the current status. But in the wake of the Orion base heat shield decisions, there are still a lot of details that need to be reworked. So we left the event with the same questions and added more questions. I'll go through what we learned and the waiting games that remain, but what stood out to me was the weird vibes at the event and the timing. It is hard not to wonder if the media was brought in as an afterthought right before the Christmas holiday break because of the outcome of the election and the prospect that the new leadership taking over in a month will be making big changes. The event was held at the Kennedy Space Center on Monday, December 16th. We didn't know about it until afterwards, but the media event followed a private event held for Futuramic, the Boeing supplier that designed and just finished construction of the Vehicle Assembly Building High Bay 2 facility for future SLS core stage final assembly. News coming out of the event was more about what we heard than what we saw, although it was sometimes difficult to hear and we were limited in what we could see. Detailed information was still limited in some cases, because the programs went back to the drawing board with their schedules after the election, after the heat shield decision, and after Artemis II and III were rescheduled. That new set of delays to the next Artemis missions was only announced a couple of weeks ago, and it was too early for them to say much about schedules, because they are just getting started reworking them. First, around midday, we were taken to the Vehicle Assembly Building, where we could see the next solid rocket booster motor segment was set up for stacking later in the week. But most of the time we were in High Bay 2, where the Artemis II SLS core stage was installed in the tooling and platforms of Boeing's new core stage final assembly facility that subcontractor Futuramic had just completed. The event was a lot like a series of private press conferences. There was 15 minutes with the Artemis II crew and Amit Kshatriya, who is the head of the Moon to Mars Program Office within NASA's Exploration Directorate. That provided time for a few questions, and then there was an hour for rotations to speak with a dozen or so other officials with the programs and contractors. Key officials like Mr. Kshatriya left before all the groups got the opportunity to ask questions, like mine for instance, which is unfortunate but also added to the weird vibes of the day. Any pictures or video had to be taken during that time too, so that also subtracted from the available time for questions. Then we were taken down the road to the KSC industrial area and into the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout building, where we were split into groups again and got about 30 minutes inside the Lockheed Martin Orion Industrial Operations Zone, or IOZ, for pictures and questions. Or, in my case, questions and pictures. Most of the Artemis II Orion hardware was being worked on, so we weren't allowed down to the high bay area where the spacecraft is in the final assembly systems test, or fast cell. We stayed in the low bay and saw mostly hardware for Artemis III and IV, although we did see the forward bay cover for the Artemis II spacecraft. NASA subsequently provided pictures taken of some of that activity with the Artemis II Orion. In terms of takeaways from the event, looking at the big picture for Artemis II, Mr. Kshatriya emphasized that NASA leadership views the April 2026 target date as a no later than date right now. The goal that they want to challenge the teams to work towards is to roll the stack out by the end of the year, 2025. Assuming that means the full stack with Orion, that would provide a lot of margin for April 2026 or allow an earlier launch readiness date. However, there's not enough information right now to tell how realistic that goal is. The Orion base heat shield decision was only 2 weeks ago, and there's a lot of schedule replanning going on between EGS, Orion, and SLS for Artemis II. It's too early to tell, and we'll have to see if and when NASA might tell us next year. Orion has been the critical path for Artemis II for a while, and it is going to remain that way for most of 2025. A couple of weeks ago, around the time of the heat shield decision and press conference, the spacecraft was moved from the altitude chamber back to the fast cell, and NASA reported that the flight batteries that were modified to better handle extreme abort scenarios were reinstalled shortly thereafter. Howard Hugh is NASA's Orion program manager, and I asked him about where final assembly of the spacecraft is. Where are you in terms of completing testing and then getting into the installations, the solar array wings, the sag panels, the forward bay cover?
Yeah, so right now, that's why we couldn't go over there. We're doing the back shell panels. And what we're going to do is, obviously we're wrapping up, and we don't have really any, I would say, any more major tests after this. It's more wrap up. And so we'll execute very closely the flow of all the things that need to be put on. So all the back shell panels will get put on. We'll do final touch-up work on the crew module, and then we'll start getting ready to do the solar array installs. So we'll work with our European partners to kind of define a time when we do that. That's one of the very last things, of course, and then the panels go on, right? And so that'll be in the spring time frame that we're working to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a target for handing over to EGS at this point?
We're working on a very aggressive date right now. So Kirk and I are working on that right now to figure out exactly what that commitment will be so that EGS can do their planning as well. So part of it is, as soon as we got out of part 2 of the vacuum chamber, now we've got a defined set of work, functional work that we were doing with the vehicle. We got a decision on the heat shield. Now we're running full bore on the schedule.
Given that status, it would be challenging to get into launch processing for Orion by the end of the first quarter. We'll see when the solar arrays are mounted and then the rest of the hardware, like the service module fairing panels, are installed. That will be an indicator that final assembly is nearing completion. Orion will be handed over to the spacecraft and offline operations team within Exploration Ground Systems, who will prepare the spacecraft for stacking. That's several months of work to load propellants and other fluid commodities on board, and then to stack the launch abort system on top of the crew module, and then encapsulate it with the LAS ogive fairings. That work also includes test and checkout of the spacecraft with live pressurized propellant systems, cabin atmosphere tanks, water tanks, and the systems between the LAS and the crew module that have to work together, from the abort motors to the hatches. I asked Mr. Hugh and Kirk Shireman, who is Lockheed Martin's Orion Vice President and Program Manager, about whether they are looking at ways to streamline the EGS offline ops schedule too. Once it goes over to spacecraft offline ops, are they looking at trying to ramp up a little bit to improve that schedule?
We talking about hand to our ground systems team?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we're working very hard. Kirk, myself, and other leaders, we were getting together to look at the overall flow. Where, like I think Kirk was telling you, it's not a hand throw over the fence kind of thing. We're going to work collaboratively wherever we think we have the most effect to help schedule. We're going to do whatever is necessary. That includes, expertise from Lockheed Martin to help the flow around, or we can figure out another way to, if we can save schedules in other ways, we're going to try to work that as well to help the EGS team.
Most of the Orion hardware that we could directly view in the IOZ was for Artemis 3 and 4. This was a rare opportunity to check on the current status by visual inspection. We saw that the Artemis 3 Orion service module was positioned in the proof pressure cell, which meant that the orbital tube welding of connections between the main elements of the module, the European service module, ESM-3, and the crew module adapter, were complete. The two elements were bolted together in late September, and then integrating the systems like the fluid connections, power and data, and so on were next. I did have to ask whether the service module was just entering or about to exit the cell, and it's the former, more or less. The service module is being prepared for proof testing of those welds between the CMA and the ESM. Around the time that the CMA and ESM were bolted together at the end of the summer, the estimate was that both the crew and service modules for Artemis 3 were targeting their initial power-on milestones, or IPO, in the spring. I asked about that estimate again, given another 3 months or so of assembly and test. I'd asked earlier about the IPO for the crew module, service module for 3. They were talking about spring time frame. Is that kind of where you are now?
Okay. Yeah, we're working on all our schedules actually. So okay. I'd rather not quote a date, because what we're trying to do with Kirk's help is think about not only running fast on 2, obviously to get to the dates, but also in parallel, what can we do on 3, because we're going to need that 3 bird as soon as we can. So from a schedule perspective, we're looking at every schedule, and we've learned a lot from Artemis II, obviously, and so going through the first time for life support system, for displays and controls, we're going to have a better understanding of what's that going to take for 3. right? Because we got to outfit the inside as well with all the life support systems. So we're gonna look through every schedule, and in fact we're gonna try to make sure we got ground infrastructure and things like that will support this parallel kind of activity.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the questions that wasn't covered in detail in the heat shield decision press conference was what happened to the unit for Artemis III. As I've noted more than once this year, that heat shield was already built with the same design as the Artemis I and II units, which NASA now knows doesn't have the permeability for a full skip reentry. NASA only plans to fly Artemis II with restrictions on the skip reentry. In the press conference, NASA leadership did say that the Artemis III unit would fly with AVCOAT blocks manufactured with the permeability they determined was necessary during their investigation. Mr. Hugh and Mr. Shireman explained what they did with the Artemis III unit and the forward plan for the heat shields and AVCOAT blocks.
Are you going to build new blocks for that carrier and put that on 3, or are you going to strip down the one for 3?
So we already are machining off the 3 blocks already at Marshall. So that's almost done. In fact, so that is so both are in candidate, and so we'll pick the one that fits our schedule the best. So either one is eligible for the 3 mission, and so that's great. Again, flexibility, having the hardware to choose is really good for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
that's still ahead of us, and we'll determine when we need to do that.
We're manufacturing blocks, the AVCOAT blocks, as quickly as we can. In fact, we're going to step up in our production rate in the first of the year if we get some more equipment in. So we're moving to do blocks for 3 and 4 as quick as we possibly can.
How long ago? I don't know how long it takes to cut because I know they did the same thing with the Artemis I heat shield once you guys did all of your investigatory stuff. When was that shipped to Marshall to take the blocks off?
So we did it 2 months ago.
Okay.
So we started 2 months ago. We shipped it to Marshall and started that work roughly. I don't know exact date.
Okay.
But yeah. So as soon as we figured, hey, you know what, we knew we need to build a new heat shield, and we couldn't use the Artemis III because it wasn't on the bird already. Then we decided, hey, you know what, we want to have both carrier structures in play.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then for the blocks that are in manufacturing, or will that fit within the schedule you have for either the crew module for 3 or the overall schedule?
Yeah, definitely. That's what Kurt's talking about. Not only are we ramping up production across the board, not just building blocks, machining the blocks to fit the sizes of the heat shield. I mean, we're going to make sure we have plenty of margin room-wise for the heat shield for 3 and 4 and so on. And so this gives us, having 2 carrier structures and the ramped up production is going to give us a lot of flexibility.
We saw the Artemis III crew module, kind of, since it was covered with export control protection. It is in the crew module workstation, and Lockheed Martin continues to work on installation of wire harnesses and some components. We also saw the crew module and crew module adapter structures for Artemis IV. That crew module unit remains in the bird cage, where outfitting of the primary structure and some secondary structures is done. The crew module adapter structure was nearby in the footprint of the lift station. Given the increasing uncertainty about what happens to Artemis IV, it's not clear what the schedule is for that Orion build. In terms of SLS status updates, for Artemis II, Exploration Ground System is either handling the flight hardware or is about to take ownership of it. The EGS team with prime contractor Amentum is stacking SLS for Artemis II, and earlier in the morning of Monday, December 16th, the left aft center solid rocket booster segment was transferred from the Surge 2 building of the Rotation, Processing, and Search Facility, or RPSF, to the VAB transfer aisle. I spoke with Todd Lamond, who is with Amentum in Strategic Planning and Integration, and Mark Pond, Senior Director of NASA Programs for Northrop Grumman Propulsion Systems, about booster processing. The plan was to prepare the left aft center segment for lifting and then do the lift overnight Wednesday the 18th into Thursday the 19th of December. Then it takes about 24 hours of work across multiple shifts to mate the field joint between the left aft center and left aft segments. NASA posted some imagery of that field joint assembly work after the segment was lifted into place. We can see the environmental enclosure that has been set up around the field joint to create a controlled work area and environment to mate the tang of the aft center segment to the clevis of the aft segment. The holiday break is basically beginning now, so the next segment would be the right-hand aft center segment, and that would be after the teams return from the break after New Year's. As with Artemis I, they will alternate between the left and right-hand boosters to finish stacking the remaining 8 segments, and that will be followed by the 2 forward assemblies. The plan is to transport those 2 forward assemblies from the booster fabrication facility to the VAB in mid-January. They will be parked in one of the low bay areas of the transfer aisle, where some maintenance and final preps will be completed. The boosters were expected to be stacked and closed out in March. That is also the time frame that the core stage is expected to be ready to mate to the boosters. There are a few things that NASA and Boeing plan to do while the stage is installed vertically in High Bay 2. I spoke with NASA's SLS Deputy Program Manager, Chris Cianciola, for a few minutes, and he ran through a couple of those work items. One of the first is to temporarily remove cards in the RS-25 engine controllers so that the prime contractor for the controllers, Honeywell, can flash update them. Okay, that's interesting. So you can't flash them here?
No, it's about a card, and I think you have to change the card out.
Okay, so
you open the box.
Okay.
Change that card out. So
okay.
It's the way they burn it in on that one. It's called Norflash. It's what their term is. But yeah, so we could have brought other controllers in and put it on. But our preference is we want to keep the engine and the controller paired based on the green light. Everything, because the card change out is just a quick acceptance test.
Right.
Not a big deal.
And that's easier. Well, actually, I mean, so
it's just a time thing, but did we have time? And we absolutely do, based on Cliff's doing.
You would have access. I mean, you would have access either location, even if you were up on the boosters, or it would be
so
easier.
The problem is I would already have this done, but I couldn't do it in horizontal.
Okay, right.
So I needed to be vertical.
Okay, and that's planned. You're going to plan on doing it here.
Yeah, versus that's one of the first jobs here is to take those off.
Okay.
And then cycle them back through Honeywell.
Okay. And then in terms of other types of work on the stage while it's here, so you talked about flashing the engine controllers. What other types of work are you going to be doing here?
So we've got a lot of thermal protection work, right? So we did some hardening in certain areas, and we held off on some closeouts until we found out what the final design on those closeouts needed to be. So we can do that here. We have what we call a notice of escape from one of our suppliers on some of our valves, where we need to go out and do a leak check, right? That they might have missed.
Okay.
Might have missed. So to do that, we've got to remove some TPS from those valves, do the test, and then reapply it. So we're going to remove it, test it over there, and reapply it over there.
So in terms of doing a valve leak check, they're going to remove the TPS in High Bay 2, and then they're going to wait until the core stage is moved over to High Bay 3 and stacked with the boosters in order to do the retest and then reapply the TPS over there. One of the possible areas of work is for what is called the vortex issue that was seen during the Artemis I launch. The SLS program is still reviewing possible options, and Mr. Cianciola explained the issue and the options. I guess it's called the vortex issue from Artemis I. And they were talking about maybe putting something like strakes on.
Absolutely. So here's the story, right? Yeah. It's on the inner tank in the area where we attached the boosters, right in that area. What we saw from Artemis I was a vibration environment that was higher than predicted, but was not outside of qual. But when you open it up for any trajectory we could fly, we could bust the qual, right? So we need to understand what our trajectory is in environments flying. So there's 3 options that we could go off for the next mission. Just understand the environments and fly within that restricted area. We could put isolators on our critical components inside the inner tank. So you look at each box and how would that environment affect that box. So that's what I'm really worried about. I'm not worried about the structure. I'm worried about the boxes inside the inner tank. Or add strakes. There's a preliminary design, I say preliminary. And we could even, this is something that could possibly be done for this vehicle, was to add some strakes on each side of the booster attached. So that's all in the trade space, those three things, right? Okay. Understand the in-flight environment, and we're not going to bust any qual environments on any of the boxes. Add isolation at the box, or add strakes. So those three things are all in the trade space, and we know we got to get on it, right? And otherwise, if you let time go, the options start falling off.
Mm-hmm. Cliff Lanham was also there. He's the Senior Vehicle Operations Manager for Exploration Ground Systems. And I asked him about the planning schedule for stacking the Artemis II SLS and then test and checkout after that.
When is this going to be ready to mate to the boosters?
About the same time.
Same time?
Yep, they're running about neck and neck in the schedule. And as soon as the SLS or the core stage is ready, boosters will be done and we'll be ready to go stack.
Okay.
Core stage. Yeah,
okay.
They're very close in the schedule. So.
Okay. And now, so then...
and, let me just add, so they're very close in the schedule, and if for some reason something happens, we have the ability to get them out and get on with stacking and do whatever we have to do over in High Bay 3 to avoid any major impacts to our schedule.
Okay. Where is... so there's... I know I asked you about these before, but I think the schedule's changed a little bit. So the ICPS and the OSA, where are those? When's the ICP? Has it been brought over already?
No, it's still over on the Cape side. We're planning for around mid-February right now to bring it over. Okay. And we got about 2 weeks of servicing and about 2 weeks of margin on that to make sure we're ready as soon as the stack is ready for it.
Okay. And there's no rush to get it out of. I guess ULA gets to keep the dock.
No, yeah, and we always want to make sure we don't get ourselves into a traffic jam in the NPPF. When we have ICPS over there, we got the ETA, Environmental Test Article, coming back, which is Orion. We'll be working on that, as well as we're going to have Orion coming in. So we don't want it any sooner than we need it, but we got to have it, in time to do our servicing and get it ready for stacking.
Okay. And then I know that it's the tanking test decision is still out in front of you. Is there at least a time frame for when you would make that decision?
Yeah, I think we're targeting now that decisions are being made about Orion and everything. We're probably looking at the, let's say, February, March timeframe, where that story will go to Moon to Mars for a final decision. Right now, it does not affect what we're doing in terms of stacking. It doesn't affect that at all. So the February, March timeframe works for what we need.
And then once you get to the short stack point of it, before you would, well, I think before I get do you know when they're going to ship the OSA, fly it out here?
Yeah. So right now we're targeting April 1st. Okay. That's what we've told them we wanted it. Okay. But obviously we're not going to stack that pending a decision on the tanking test.
Okay.
So.
And then for once you get the SLS stacked, what's the approximate time frame for doing the integrated test and checkout?
So what will happen is we'll be done stacking around that early April, mid-April time frame. We'll go into our preps for the integrated operations, and we have a couple months of testing. So that'll carry us a good portion of through the summer with the integrated testing.
Okay.
So to summarize, Mr. Lanham said that the boosters and core stage schedules were running neck and neck for mating them in the March timeframe. The interim cryogenic propulsion stage is still in storage at United Launch Alliance's Delta Operations Center on the Cape Canaveral side of the NASA Causeway. And the plan now is to move the stage to the multi-payload processing facility in mid-February. After the core and boosters are mated, the forecast right now is to have SLS stacked up through the ICPS in the mid-April timeframe. Mr. Lanham also noted that the Orion stage adapter could be transported to KSC in early April, but it will be many months before that needs to be stacked. The OSA is the connector between the SLS Block 1 vehicle and Orion. If NASA chooses to conduct a tanking test without Orion, the OSA isn't needed for that. That tanking test decision is still pending, and he said that could happen in that February-March timeframe, probably at the earliest. Regardless, after the SLS ICPS short stack, so to speak, is bolted together, then there's a few months of connecting the umbilicals and testing all of those connections. Each umbilical plate has dozens of individual connectors, some of which have even more individual connector pins. and every channel of data has to be verified, along with power and overall command and control. There's more information about the High Bay 2 facility that NASA and its contractors celebrated privately before the media event, and I'll look to cover some background and context about the new tooling and platforms in the next few weeks. Given we were in the VAB, there wasn't much directly associated with SLS hardware beyond Artemis II. All of that is elsewhere at Kennedy Space Center. But there were a couple of Boeing representatives there, and I was able to ask about the status of Cell N at the Michoud assembly facility in New Orleans. That's the thermal protection system foam spray facility for application of spray-on foam insulation onto the acreage of the two large core stage propellant tanks, the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen tanks. Repairs to the robotic foam application system have been in work, and Craig Williams confirmed that Boeing is still looking to do the foam sprays on the core stage 3 LH2 tank in the next couple of weeks or so. Stepping back and looking at the bigger picture, the event had many familiar characteristics. I've been in the VAB many times and the Orion IOZ a couple of times, and the opportunity to get detailed updates at these media events has always been challenging at best. But what stood out about this one and gave it weird vibes was the question, why now? This was only the second Artemis event at KSC during the year, after one in mid-July. There was that event and another event the week before in New Orleans at the Michoud assembly facility. But aside from that, NASA has offered few opportunities to interact with the people planning and working on Artemis 2, 3, and 4 to stay informed about progress. And then this event popped up on short notice at a peculiar time of the year. This was the last working week of the year. The holiday fortnight is beginning this weekend. Now that the heat shield decision is made, it's an active work time too, which meant hardware was either kept at a long distance, such as in the VAB, or was covered up. The Artemis II Orion spacecraft was in process in the fast cell, and we weren't allowed over there to see it. And as I said, very limited areas of the VAB were available to be documented. It would have been more productive to allow the NASA KSC photographers to get shots. One example of that is the engine shop that L3 Harris is bringing back to life in the VAB for their RS-25 engines. I was able to verify its location at the event, but we were not able to take pictures or look inside. In terms of providing a status update on only Artemis II or detailed updates across Artemis, it was too early for NASA to say, given all the replanning going on. I went over some of the information and context provided from responses to questions, but we left the event with pretty much the same uncertainties about the outlook for Artemis II in the next few months and the future of Artemis overall. It led to the big picture question, after us media have had to read the proverbial tea leaves all year, why do a briefing now, with schedules being reworked and uncertainty still running high? It's hard not to wonder if this was held because of all the speculation and rumors of possible drastic changes to these programs in a month when the new administration takes over. If the Exploration Directorate and Moon to Mars are allowed to continue and press on to fly Artemis II as currently constituted, in other words with SLS, then we will see if another media briefing will be provided to talk about the new schedules that they are devising now and into the new year. But without the periodic updates that have been missing for a few years, the information provided at the event will get stale before too long. In other news and notes for the week, some of the final postings of the year were published during the final regular work week of the year. NASA published a story about the Orion environmental test article, which was mentioned by NASA officials earlier in the video. The ETA completed testing to help certify the Artemis II Orion design and configuration meets the requirements for launch aborts, which is one of the capabilities needed for the spacecraft to be fully crew-rated. The Artemis I crew module was used for the testing at the Armstrong Test Facility in Ohio, which ran for most of 2024 beginning in January. The ETA will be transported back to the Kennedy Space Center now. As noted by Cliff Lanham earlier in the video, it will head to the MPPF for some additional testing of the crew module propulsion system. This goes back over a year, but back in the summer of 2023, the word was that a functional test would be performed of the prop system, including cycling the propellant valves. Since the crew module prop system uses toxic hydrazine as a monopropellant, the MPPF is one of the places where that testing of hazardous systems can be conducted. A couple more NASA publications reported on the progress of Exploration Ground Systems Integrated Systems Verification and Validation testing ahead of Artemis II. One test was for verification and validation of software upgrades to the Ground Launch Control System. That test was conducted in conjunction with a terminal countdown simulation that is part of the training program for the launch team. Time-lapse video of ISVV-7 was also published, showing a battery test that NASA wrote about a year ago September, so September 2023. The batteries are part of an uninterruptible power supply system in the VAB that would support the mobile launcher and a fully stacked Orion SLS vehicle, and the system was tested by cutting the normal power supply. As the story notes, a similar UPS system at Launchpad 39B provides protection in case of a power outage while the mobile launcher and an Orion SLS vehicle are out at the pad. There was also another summertime picture of the Gateway's Habitation and Logistics Outpost module published, showing the inside of the Halo structure back in July at the end of a static load testing campaign. Halo has since gone through a proof pressure test, with transportation of the structure to the U.S. planned for 2025 now. One of those questions that went unanswered throughout 2024 and remains unanswered is a new target launch date for the Halo with its eventually conjoined power and propulsion element. That remains on the watch list for Artemis heading into 2025, but is now overshadowed by deeper, fundamental questions about the future of NASA's Exploration Directorate. Thanks as always for taking some of your time to watch these videos. Click on the like button if you found this video informative.